Hello and welcome to my channel. In this one I'm going to do a portrait of a black panther and I'm going to use colored pencils on sandpaper. I'm going to start with a sketch and I'm going to talk about the reference and the composition in a minute. But I just want to say a few words about the materials, just in case you haven't watched any of my colored pencil drawings before. I like to work with colored pencils on sandpaper or sanded paper because colored pencils perform better on a textured surface that allows you to layer and blend more easily. Now, the surface that I'm working on is a 1000 grit wet to dry sandpaper that you can buy in a hardware store. It's normally used for polishing cars and stuff, but it works really well with colored pencils as well as pastel pencils. The colored pencils I'm using are Faber-Castell Polychromos colored pencils, and if while you're watching this you may think that they behave a little bit more like pastel pencils because of the way I can layer them. That's because of the surface that I'm working on. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. Right now I want to focus on the drawing process. So once I had a sketch in place, I started working with a black colored pencil, and the black colored pencil will be what I will use for the most part for this drawing because there are a lot of darker tones. Of course, I will try to make it a little bit more interesting by adding a hint of color here and there. So I started with the ear on the left, and the interesting thing about the ears, if you look at the reference, and the reference will be in the description as usual, if you look at the reference you will see that one of the ears is turned towards us, the other one is turning away from us. So cats, like many other animals, can rotate their ears like that. So here with this one, because it's facing us, you will also see some of those lighter, finer hairs in the middle part of the ear. So as you can see, I shaded it in such a way to make sure that this middle part is a little bit lighter, but I'm going to add some other colors on top of that as well. Here where the opening of the ear is, that needs to be a little bit darker. And by the way, in addition to the Faber-Castell Polychromos black pencil, I'm also using the Kohinoor black pencil because it's a little bit darker when you layer it on top of other colors. Anyway, to add some other tones to this fur, I'm going to be using this Caput Mortem, which is a dull reddish brown color. I think I see some of those tones in the reference, but it doesn't have to be exactly the same. I'm going to throw in a few of those reddish brownish tones here and there. I don't really know whether this is the actual color of the panther's fur, or maybe it's a result of the environment and the lighting. I don't really know, but that's what I'm going to try to capture. Anyway, here for these lighter, longer hairs, I'm starting to throw in a little bit of grayish color. First I'm using the mid-tone gray, and then on top of that I will use an even lighter color, like a light warm gray or something. Because the colors in this middle part of the ear are both lighter in color, but they're also protruding a little bit, sticking out a little bit, and they're longer and fluffier, so they will be more exposed to the light source. So they need to be drawn with a pencil of a lighter color, a lighter value, and that's what I'm doing here. I used a bit of that light gray color. Here at the top you can see that with these short marks I'm trying to imitate the appearance of short fur, and I'm doing the same thing on the left side as well. Starting to work on one of the eyes, drawing the darker shape, the darker outline first, and then I'm going to draw the rest of the eye using mostly yellowish and orange colors. I made some minor modifications to the shape of the animal's head and the eyes, as you will see eventually, because I wanted the head to appear a little bit more round, and I wanted the eyes also to appear a bit more round, not as squinty as they did in the reference. I put in a tiny catchlight in the eye using a white pencil, and now I'm just going to work around it and make sure that I create enough contrast. I already put down the pupil with a black pencil and then the catchlight with a white pencil, and then I'm going to work around that with this yellowish orange color. This bright warm color, and I put down a little bit of other colors on top of that, a little bit of orange and a little bit of lighter yellowish here around the middle. These brighter colors will make for a very nice contrast with the rest of the fur, which is mostly dull and black. So here there are also some lighter details around the eye, but I'll get to that a bit later. Here you can also see how I'm drawing that outline of the ear by drawing that interrupted shape to imitate short hair, short fur. And now I'll basically start shading the left side of the head. My approach will generally be to put in at least some of the darker areas first, and then draw the lighter fur or the lighter marks on top of them or in between them. So let me talk about that a little bit. So on this surface, as you will see, because it's a textured sanded surface, you can layer colored pencils easily. You can draw lighter marks on top of the darker layers, which means that you can work both from dark to light and light to dark. You can go back and forth actually. This is not really something that you can do with colored pencils on regular paper. That's why a lot of people are surprised the first time they see how colored pencils perform on sanded paper. But it has to be a finer grit, I think. Lower grit sanded papers work with pastels, but with colored pencils you want a finer grit, at least 800, if not 1000 grit, which is what I'm using here. I'm softening the marks a little bit with a brush, basically blending it, because it's relatively easy to blend when you put down enough material and when the target color is not much different than the background color of the paper that you're using. But if the background color of the paper is much different, then it can be a little bit more difficult to overcome that background color, and you need to put down or layer the pencil more thoroughly. Here there is a little bit more shadow below the lower jaw area, because the head is casting a bit of shadow down onto the neck and chest area. I'll get to that later. Now, I forgot to mention that while I was shading the eye, you can see that there is a little bit of shadow under the upper eyelid, because the light source is above, the light is coming from above, and that's why that upper eyelid area is casting a bit of shadow onto the iris, onto the eyeball. But I mostly try to make the eyeball appear like a round, smooth area. Anyway, now I'm doing the fur here on the left side of the face, and I'm making slightly longer marks where needed, because the length of the fur varies in different parts of the body. So where the fur is longer, we need to use longer pencil strokes. Where it's shorter, we need to try to imitate shorter fur, either with short strokes or with just by dragging the pencil to create a texture that looks like short fur. So I always soften that a little bit with a brush. What a brush does, it pushes in a bit of that material into the lighter spaces which I didn't cover. And I'm using that reddish brown again on some parts of the fur to make it a bit more interesting. Now finally I am starting to work with a light grey pencil to draw some lighter details on that fur on the left. Now I think you can tell already that the light is coming more from the left side, which means that the left side will be the light side of the panther's head, and the shadow side will be on the right. So because this area here is more exposed to the light source, I am simply putting down more of these lighter marks. I also didn't really shade it that hard. I didn't put that much of the black pencil in the first place, but now I'm adding some additional highlights to make it look like the fur here is both exposed to the light source and also reflecting a bit of light because it's kind of glossy and shiny. For that I'm using a light cool gray, and I'm trying to imitate the appearance of that short fur by making those short marks, but at the same time I mustn't make those marks too distinct because they need to blend into the rest of the fur. This whole forehead area is dark for the most part, so I covered it with a black colored pencil and then just blended it with a brush. And I'm going to add some more details around the eye, or rather above the eye, where there are also some lighter areas and some whiskers and things like that. Now for the nose, I'm going to start by drawing the nostrils first. I often, when I draw either portraits of animals or people, I often like to put in those darker details to be able to navigate through the rest of the portrait more easily, because that way I know where everything is, and also as a sort of a reference how much value I need in different parts of the portrait. So I put in some of these darker details first. So once I have that, I will try to work out the shape of the nose and add some other colors in there. This tip of the nose is for the most part of grayish color, or that's the way it appears, but then there are some pinkish tones around it, which I will get to in a minute. But I also need to draw this small highlight here on the left side, because the skin on the nose is also a relatively smooth area, and as you can see it's reflecting a little bit of light to the left because the light source is coming from that side. So that's the nose. Now I need to work on the area around the nose, and for that I'm going to use some flashy pinkish tones. I'm using a cinnamon here, and then just a little bit above the nose, and then I'm going to use a little bit of light beige red in those places where it needs to be even lighter. And to make a transition towards the darker fur, I will just use that reddish brown or something like that. So here, just a few touches of that light beige red, and then a little bit of this dull reddish brown color on top of that and above that. The reason why the skin appears, the reason why this part of the nose appears a little bit lighter is because the fur is probably both a lot shorter in that place and a lot less dense, so more of the skin is visible in that area. Drawing the mouth now, and some details on this upper jaw area between the mouth and the nose. I'm just going to shade it a little bit with a bit of a black colored pencil, but not too much, because I'm trying to keep the left side of the face, the left side of the head, lighter overall. And I added a touch of burnt sienna as well, here and there on that fur, to give it some more brownish tones. And now I'm just going to add some lighter grayish tones where needed, where the fur needs to be a little bit lighter. Now, one thing that I have to explain, you can see that this mid-tone gray that I'm using now to make some parts of the fur a little bit lighter, you can see that it's practically the same color as the background color of my paper. So you may be wondering, well, why didn't you just leave those places where the fur needs to be lighter, why didn't you just leave them as they were, not covering them with black pencil? Well, it's not that simple. Sometimes you need to go back and forth, and sometimes it's easier or more convenient for you to establish a darker value or a darker layer first, and then draw the lighter details on top of that. And erasers are not really much of an option here when working on sanded paper, because they don't really work as well as they do on regular paper. Maybe an kneaded eraser does to some extent, but regular rubber erasers not so much. And that's not really a problem, because layering is such an advantage of this type of paper, and you can easily put lighter colors on top of the darker ones, so it looks even better than if you were to erase. Anyway, I'm adding a bit of shadow here under the lower jaw area. That's where the head will be casting the shadow down onto the neck and chest area. I'll get to that later. I'll need to finish that a bit later. Right now, I need to finish the rest of the head, or the rest of the face. This chin area, I have to shade that with a black pencil in order to imitate the direction and the appearance of the fur. So you can see how I'm sort of making my marks to follow the direction of that hair, and just adding a few lighter details here and there. I also think that I'm adding some whiskers here. As you can see, I'm able to draw these lighter marks on top of the black areas relatively easily. So I also think that the background color of my paper, which is this mid-tone gray, is also not bad for portraits. I don't really need to do anything else to the background. I'm going to draw this like a vignette. So basically, I'm going to leave it like this without any background, and fade the lower part of the portrait, fade the chest area, so that it disappears into the grey background basically. And I like vignettes. Whether I'm drawing portraits or wildlife, doesn't really matter. They give you a lot of freedom with composition, and they look very, very artistic and very nice. Now, like I said, I do like this greyish color, background color of the paper. It works pretty well, and I think it can work with many wildlife drawings or other types of drawings as well. Anyway, now I'm going to do a little bit more work on the right side of the head. I'm adding a bit of this greyish color here on the right side, because the right side is maybe catching a bit of light from above, or maybe there is some reflected light from the other side. But the main point was that I needed to make that right side of the head a little bit lighter than the ear, which is a bit darker. So now I'm working on the other eye. I drew the pupil first, just putting that darkest detail in first, and then I'm going to shade the rest of the iris. I want this whole eye to the right to be a little bit darker than the one on the left, because it's in the shadow side of the head, so it needs to be a little bit darker overall. Everything that is in the shadow, or everything that is on the shadow side, needs to be a little bit darker. I added a little bit of brownish color, and I added that reflection as well. But as you can see, the reflection is a little bit more subdued in terms of value. It's like a light grayish color, but not exactly white as it is on the left. And I added a bit more shadow coming from the eyelid on the iris. So overall, the eye is a little bit darker than the one on the left, which is what I wanted to achieve. Now I'm drawing the right edge of the face. I'm going to put in a little bit of this gray first. Not necessarily because I want to make it that light, but mostly because I want to make sure that it's lighter than the rest of the body here to the right of it, because here to the right we'll see a darker shadow area, because the head is casting a shadow onto that part of the body, onto that part of the neck and the shoulder area. So this is a large shadow here coming from the head, because of the direction of the light source, and I want to make sure that the head stands out against that shadow area. So when you're drawing, it's always important to pay attention to the range of value and the contrast in value, so that you can show to the viewer where one object ends and the other one begins, or where one part of the body ends and the other one begins, or where one surface ends and the other one begins, and what the transition between these two surfaces looks like, because sometimes you will have a softer transition where you need a slightly smoother transition, smoother edge, and sometimes you need a clean edge. So these are some of the things that you need to pay attention to if you want to make a realistic and three-dimensional looking drawing. So now I'm doing the rest of this, the body here below the left side of the head, just adding a little bit of black pencil around the edge and a few details here and there, just to show some variation in the color and the value of the fur. I also decided to make the head look a bit more round at the top. I just liked that shape a bit better, and I added some lighter details and some brownish details on the nose area as well, so that it would feel like it's protruding a little bit in comparison to this area between the eyes. Anyway, I added some whiskers and some lighter details above the eye to the right as well, and basically putting down some finishing touches when it comes to the shading of the right side of the head. I also need to finish the shading and the details on the right side of this of the upper jaw area and around the nose. As you can see, I added some pinkish details under the nostrils as well. And then this cheek area here under the cheekbones is a bit darker, so I shaded that so that it's a little bit darker, and now I'm going to add a bit more of this grayish color so that the cheekbone area would stand out a bit more. So basically I'm trying to define the topography or the anatomy of the cat's face or the head to make it look more three-dimensional. Adding some more details there and around the eyes as well. And here and there I just added a bit more of that dull reddish brown randomly to make the fur a bit more interesting, a bit less dull, with a hint of other colors. So I'm going to draw some lighter details on the other side of the upper jaw now. Just going to draw a few of those whiskers, but before I finish the rest of that, I'll need to do a little bit more work on the body here. I defined some of these darker transitions, which will make the neck and the chest area stand out a little bit better, and not as flat as it initially was. But as you can see, for the most part, I will try to fade the lower edge of my portrait so that it disappears into the grey background of the paper. That's because, as I already mentioned, I want the drawing to be a vignette, and I think it'll look more balanced and better that way. So I'm just fading the edges with a brush, and once I finish that part of the body, I will also need to add a little bit of shadow to the right, and once I have all of that in place, I will add some finishing touches in the form of whiskers around the upper and lower jaw. But I'll get to that in a few minutes. So just fading the lower part of the drawing, creating a nice looking vignette, and then adding a bit of shadow here. And you can see, because of the position of the light source, which is coming more from the left side, the head is casting its shadow from left to right, so that this right side of the body is covered with a darker area, darker value. And to avoid unnecessary texture and detail. I'm just softening that with a brush. Here and there defining some of the edges, and you can see that I even did a little bit of blending with my finger, which is not very typical with colored pencils, but on this surface it can actually be done. I'm just adding a few whiskers and trying to make sure that they look nice and smooth. And now, once I finish with those, the drawing is finished. I'm going to put my signature here on the right side, and I hope you like the way this Black Panther turned out. Pretty detailed drawing, but not a very complicated one. Colored pencils work well on this surface. Don't forget to check out my other videos, give me a like and subscribe, comment, and for longer videos and much more content you should check out my Patreon. Thanks for watching and bye bye.